So in 15 minutes or less, we are going to provide you a snapshot of the experience of family caregivers who are supporting loved ones who live with mental health challenges. Now, after that amazing presentation by Joy, let me say that our snapshot is one of those pointy-headed ones that we've gotten from sources like Statistics Canada and et cetera, et cetera. It is certainly not the real deal. It's the sort of, as I said, the sort of literature-supported profile. And we are going to encourage research and knowledge transfer and exchange in family peer support, where without a doubt the disparity between need and dedicated interest is more than significant.
Okay, I'm pretty challenged with technology, so. Okay, so this is a issue that we took to heart last October, and we wanted to follow up on it, because we all know our families of our patients and clients often do have a difficult time with the cards they got dealt with. If we look at family caregivers, 70% of them are women, 60% are employed, so they have a dual role. They have to be the breadwinner as well as the caregiver. And then 20% have comorbidity that they're taking care of. There's a physical ailment as well as a mental illness. And then 47% have been doing that for more than 5 years. That's a huge burden that they don't really get a lot of support from when that person's not in active care. Look at that, I did it. Okay, so if you look at the relationships of these people, mental health problems are very prominent all through that. With friends, it's 11%, and with the aging, it's 8%. But if you go all the way to the right, 23% with sons and daughters have mental illnesses, and that means that they're going to be a long-term responsibility for the caregiver in their home. That's a huge burden. We've all seen that, I think, in our work. So family caregiving is support provided by family caregivers, and the needs change over time. It's variable. The nature and intensity of it varies, and it's based on a lot of factors. One is the illness trajectory, and these are things we all know from our own work. Our client needs change as well. Illness trajectory, the preference of the person living with a mental illness, they do have rights, they do have choices. Competing needs, the availability of resources and the support that the family caregiver can provide. And that all changes, all those variables change over a period of time. The caregiving that they provide, if we look at it, a lot of people in this room do this as a profession, but we go home at the end of the day. And we have a weekend off. They don't. They help with organizing, supervising, daily living things, shopping, banking, appointments, housekeeping. They monitor symptoms, managing difficult behaviors. I worked in ER for a long time, and you'd see them coming in, and they were the experts. Unfortunately, they weren't the ones always listened to. And they handle situations and crises that come up. To provide companionship, emotional and financial support. And sometimes that financial support is very draining. It doesn't end. Housing and transportation. And then guidance on community resources, money management, and self-care. So they advocate, they provide encouragement, and they take care of sometimes their own grandchildren. And that can be a long-term commitment again. Find supports and services for your relative, become system navigators, and often they know the system a lot better than some people that actually work in it. And they look at alternative sources for treatment and interfaces. So basically what they're doing is what we do, as I said. They're case managers, but they're always on. They never get relief. There's never any respite. So how are they coping with this? You can imagine that sometimes it's not going too well. Family members report a burden of responsibility that's very high. It's compared to dementia caregivers. And they often are at risk of getting ill themselves, either physically or mentally. And that happens as they age, of course, even more. They get physically tired of doing what they're doing. So if you look at how they cope with them overall, 31% do well, 54% do okay, but if you look at it, 15% aren't doing that well, and that's a big proportion. That's a huge proportion, and all these people are at risk of getting their own mental illness, their own health issues as well. So in a way, the system's creating its own patients. We're creating a lot of suffering. And if you look at the extent of the difficulties they're having, 29% have difficulties with balancing needs, and 39% are some difficulties. But if you look at it across the board, generally the majority are not doing well in taking care of finances, mental health, and their own needs. And in physical health, they're not doing well either. It's a high proportion, and if it was general society, we'd have concerns about that.
Okay, so a bit of an overview of how they're coping. Let's unpack this a little bit. So some, as Rob said, some say they're coping relatively well, some better than others. But this is kind of interesting if we look at this. Those who are caring for someone who is not an immediate family member are coping less well. Says something perhaps about the investment. This also holds true for younger caregivers, those whose first language is not one of Canada's 2 official languages or current official languages, and those who are employed is certainly an issue as well, and impacts experience of caregiving and resilience around caregiving. No statistical difference between overall coping between men and women, although I'd like to see those interview stats. We'd like to sort of pick those apart, wouldn't we? Caregivers who did not feel other reasonable options were available to them, about 16%. And really this is a core issue, isn't it? Is that, and we heard this in a lot of the talks today, and certainly heard this in Joy's talk, is this is about rising to the occasion because you have to over and over and over again, right? Think of Bobo the clown doll. You just keep socking it in the face and it bounces up smiling, right? Those who are not confident they have the necessary skills to provide care, 28%, yet they keep on doing, right? They keep on doing. You know, Joy said, we're not experts. Well, they are experts, but they keep on doing. They're also more likely than other caregivers to say they're not coping well. So perception, how am I doing? One thing that Joy said in her presentation that the family members in the peer support group get is they come together, they support each other without judgment. There's a great bolstering for your perception, right? Your sense of self, your sense of perception, your sense of capacity as a caregiver. And the psychological distress, absolutely, and Rob has mentioned this, is we're creating a whole line of secondary, tertiary customers, as it were, by clients, patients, by this model where we use family members as unpaid default options. So people who care for or help their spouse or child are most likely to have an elevated level of psychological stress. Well, that's kind of obvious, isn't it, right? But to see it on paper is something else. And again, you saw an earlier stat where the mentioning the spouses, the sons and the daughters, you can see the elevated levels of distress there, and certainly longevity and relationship has an impact there. Again, symptoms of psychological distress and other health consequences. So on your right, your left, anyhow, the more emotional experiences, overwhelmed, angry, irritable, depressed, very significant numbers, again, where a spouse or son or daughter are the recipient of the care. And then certainly health consequences. Well, those remain to be seen, don't they, right? It's really kind of hard to prove down the road what actually caused your cardiovascular disease or your other catastrophic health condition. Very hard to make a direct causal or relationship there. And certainly then we look at the overall dollar. So this is a really big deal. And to say we have growing need for measures of austerity in our healthcare system is a massive understatement. So if we look at this idea of what's the dollar value of what the family care providers are offering or giving, absolutely there's no way of framing that really, but we do know that as of 2013, there has been no accurate estimate calculated as to how much the family caregivers saved the health and social service systems. But the 1999 estimate is somewhat interesting in terms of the dollar value of the contribution of family caregivers, including those caring for someone living with mental illness, was $5 billion a year, which could be worth as much as $12.3 billion in 2008. This is massive, massive dollars of people. So certainly, if we're going to have these individuals providing care as we do, what is that saving our system, but what is it costing them? And potentially what is it costing the system down the road when they become secondary service users as well? Is that me still? That's me still. Okay, so why are we doing this here? what could SWAHN do? SWAHN is not a service provision agency. We're not family support providers. We're knowledge practitioners if our closest title among all those be knowledge practitioners. Timely and adequate support for caregivers is likely to be associated with three main benefits. So benefit to the person living with the health condition, benefit to the caregivers themselves, and certainly benefit to the health and social services systems. So this is a song I'm singing regularly these days, that practice without knowledge is not practice. So can SWAHN backfill practice with knowledge? And certainly where the family care providers are there, they're probably the most robust, needed primary care providers of those who struggle with their mental health challenges. What can our knowledge practices do to support that shaky infrastructure that they're working within? And is this still me? I'm keep going. Okay, Rob will let me know when I'm going. Okay. So why are we calling for an increase, other than the obvious, an increased interest in research and family peer support? Well, if we fail to recognize, acknowledge, and support family caregivers, we're heightening the risk of becoming collateral casualties. So we've got to backfill them with some kind of support. Support requires knowledge, and that knowledge infrastructure, right? So well-supported family caregivers are likely to provide better care for relatives, generate savings in the system, and certainly enhance the benefits of caregiving. And again, that's where we can come in as a health network, is supporting that with knowledge, with research, with science. So I did a little bit of it just to support our presentation here. I went on to the UW Library online database just to sort of do a couple of quick searches just to see what's out there in the literature. And a couple of people have alluded to the dearth of research that's out there, and absolutely no doubt there is. So this is peer support, as in generally peer support. This would be mostly service users themselves. And you can see the different searches that I've done here. Number of items found, fairly decent. I mean, you have to comb through it to see whether there's how many usable articles would be in each one, but certainly decent enough numbers, right? Searching mental illness peer support, lived experience mental health peer support, mental disorder peer support, et cetera, et cetera. Some fairly decent numbers, right? All sort of, a couple of low ones there, but mostly, up over 1,000, 2,000 articles found. Then we go to mental disorder and family peer support. Now, you could say, well, Marnie, those look pretty good too. We're in the 4,000, 3,000 numbers. When you search through those, it's really fascinating to see what you see. I'm thinking, what's that doing in there? When you actually search through and you see what some of the articles, we're not talking a huge amount of research. And we're talking a shockingly low amount of research, especially in relation to the need that is out there. The need for here is no less same need here, but a completely different profile of content that's out there in terms of actual research that is relevant, usable research for our purposes.
Okay, so this is where the rubber hits the road. One thing I have to say, and I was telling Catherine earlier, I was really pleased to have 3 frontline staff come to me and say, I like what SWAHN does and I want to be part of it. This is where we can get the interface between the academic side and the clinical side and get informed practice changes. And I think this is one area where we're seeing a dearth of research and something that we can build on. When we had our event in October over in London, we had some recommendations that came out of that day, and I'll just review them with you as a setup for what we're going to be doing next. So one recommendation was seeing SWAHN as a liaison, bringing together resources to enable centralized access, connect people and resources. Greater peer involvement in research. Okay, so that was one area where we saw a need even then, and it's been confirmed since then with our work up to now. Advocate for integration of peer support into broader infrastructure and others make it part of our practice that we do normally. It shouldn't be an odd thing. We should be looking at data management that allows us to get the data out there. And I know one of my colleagues here was saying that she has tons of data going back years, and she's frustrated because it doesn't go anywhere. And this is something where we can start doing that. Create a repository for research and educational information. Beyond a library, something that's living, that really shares information in a timely way or dialogue. Facilitate communications of shared visions. And perhaps the best one, educate frontline providers and senior leadership. Get everybody on the same page, understand where we're going, and make sure that we all talk the same terms. And I'll tell you, peer support doesn't have that. It means different things to different people, and that's one thing I got out of that event in October. Bridge gaps between the paradigms, and look at outcomes and evaluation, support, studies, and implementation. We really have to get something that informs what we're doing in a real way, that's concrete with evidence. And then look at standardized educational resources. So as tools for both education and awareness. So these were recommendations that came out of October, and we're going to be working on similar things soon. So in 15 minutes, and I think we hit the mark, hopefully we're providing you a snapshot of where we're at right now, and look at the challenges that people who take care of their loved ones have to face themselves. I think we all know this, but I think the numbers were a lot higher than I thought in terms of negative outcomes. And we encourage research and knowledge transfer and exchange in family peer support. And there's a disparity we have to look at, understand, and start addressing. So I think that's it. And we'll go to questions.